Hello and welcome to our next video on the new Unity GUI. What we're going to be talking about today is a little bit of world canvas.
Yes, indeed. We're going to try and put together the thing that you're looking at right now, which is a world space canvas, which is following a character and showing off a number of different world space GUIs, some of which are animated, some of which contain buttons, and we're going to show you how this was put together. Okay, let's go. So what we're going to do is first off start out by putting in a canvas.
As you'll see, when you create a canvas, it starts by being created in the scene and it's quite large. This is because when you have a canvas, its width and height is actually specified in pixels, as you can see in the inspector. This canvas we have created here is by default in screen space overlay. What that means is that its width and height is reflective of the game view. What we're going to do is we're going to change this setting now and change it from being a screen space overlay canvas to a world space canvas. What a world space canvas does is that it lives in the world much like a painting or a computer screen, and things get rendered onto it. So what you'll see here is this canvas still has a width and a height. What we're going to do is we're going to move this canvas to be in a nicer location next to our character.
So what we want to do is create something that pixel-wise is a sensible width and height for the UI that we want to create. So what we're going to make is going to be 750 pixels by, let's say, 400. Let's say 700 by 400 for sake of argument. And that kind of canvas that we have is something that might correspond to what we'd make in Photoshop in pixel terms. So the problem that we face now is that we need to get this scaled down to the right exact size to fit next to our character, which, as we know, is an actual scale and 2 units tall. So what we want to do is to scale that down, and scale is the key word here. We don't want to adjust our width and height so that this rectangle that you're seeing actually fits with the character, but instead we're going to actually use the scale value. So what I'm going to do as a quick cheat, position wise, is just to drop this onto the character and then hit reset position so that I know that it's starting off in the right place. Then what I'm going to do is actually scale this all the way down. So I'm going to start off with a really low number because I know it's quite a small factor. So I'm going to say 0.005. So scaling it way down. And then from there, I'm going to use the scaling tools to actually get it to exactly what I want. So there's my canvas, and I'm going to move this around with the transform tool. And I can see it's still kind of too big. It's reaching over here, and that's further than my camera's actually going. So I'm going to grab the scale tool and drag from the center to actually scale it right down. So what we can do to make this a little bit easier is to add an image so we can actually see the canvas in the game view to begin with. So I'm going to go to create UI, and what you'll notice is that when I create an image under this canvas, because I've got it selected in the hierarchy, it's going to drop it on there for me. And to fill the canvas, I'm going to use the anchor tool, hold down Alt and click on that to fill up the canvas. Basically what I've got now is a canvas that's scaled to the right height, and then I can go back to my canvas and just change the width a little bit. So I'm going to make that, let's say, 650. Then I'm going to use my transform tool, just bring it over to where I want it on screen, something like that.
One other thing to note is we'll use the inspector to modify the width, but using the new transform tools we have for the GUI, it's actually possible to just drag that in the scene view. By doing this, you'll notice that we're modifying the width and the height, and we're not modifying the scale.
Cool, so I can now fine tune that to what I want it to be. And the scale's ended up at something crazily small, but I don't need to worry about that because all of my elements will be relative to the parent, and they'll be scaled to this appropriate pixel value of around 600 by 400 odd. Next, we're going to go ahead and make some of those visual elements you saw at the start of the video.
So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select the image that currently exists on the canvas and scale the alpha down a little bit. This is so we can actually get a bit more perspective as to how this canvas we have is sitting in the scene. So we'll just leave it at about, this value, just under half. So let's start by creating the top bar and a label for the top bar. So what we're going to do is we're going to select the canvas in the scene, and then we're going to add a image. Now, using the layout tool, what we can do is we can select it. We can once again hold down the Alt key and select the stretch horizontal aligned to the top. As you can see, this has placed this bar at the top of the scene. Now, let's add the background image that we wish to have on this element.
So I've just made a simple 32 square black sprite, so I can just fill that in. And because we want it to be quite a nice little world space here, you can see the background, and drop the alpha down just a little bit.
The next thing we're going to do is we're just going to leave a bit of space on the right-hand side of this bar for the button, which we'll be adding later.
So I'm just going to use, again, I'm using the rect tool just to drag the edge of that over.
One other thing to note is now that we have this element on the top of the screen, it's actually probably a wise idea to scale down the delete me later element so that we can actually see how transparent that black element is. Okay, now let's move on to generating the text for this. So we're going to select the image to start with, and we're going to rename it to title bar. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go to the game object menu, select create UI, and add a text element. Now, you'll notice that in the scene view, the text is now facing the wrong way. This is actually an important thing to note, because world space canvases can be aligned however you want and rotated in the world. In this case, it's actually around the wrong way. So let's rotate that by 180 degrees in the scene view. And there we go. Our element is much nicer now.
And what you'll notice as well is that given that we started off that way around, we also need to move our title bar to where we want it to be. So luckily we have nice snapping tools, so we can just drop that over onto the left. And then we're ready to start playing around with our text element.
So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to stretch the text element to match the parent. So the first step is to make the text a child of the title bar, like so, and then select the rect transform and scale to parent. Now we're going to go to the text element itself and modify the font and the font size and style and that kind of thing. So let's just do that now.
Put in the name of our character. We're going to choose a font from our assets. So then we need to position this in with some kind of effective padding from the edge of that box. How are we going to do that, Tim?
Well, what we can do is, if you've noticed we're using the stretch layout mode at the moment, there's actually ability to set the padding on the left and right if you have your anchors for your text element separated. So let's use that now and add some padding to all sides. And there we are. So now our little text element is padded nicely.
Cool.
Okay, so let's move on to generating the actual dialogue and text we want to have on this world space UI.
And I'm going to reuse this delete me later bar. So I'm going to rename this dialogue. And one thing I am going to do, because when you generate an image with the new UI tools, it gives you this generic white look. But to actually control it properly, we're going to put in a white texture. And then we can control what that looks like alpha-wise. And we can set it and we can change it for other sprites if we want to later. And then I'm just going to scale it with the rect tool, nearly butted up against the other one, but not quite. A nice little gap there. So it looks something like this.
Now we've done that, let's once again add a text element to this and make that a child of the dialogue and scale it to be the full width.
So because the text element is white by default, we're going to change that to black. We're going to switch off the effects because we don't want them for this. Then what we're going to do is to change our font to the one that we like, a bit of roboto, and then scale up the font size. I've gone for italic for some reason, but we're going to stick with it.
One thing that's nice here is that we can also add just a slight bit of padding as well, because at the moment it looks like the text is slightly butted up against the edge.
Okay, so I'm going to keep 20 on the left, and then let's put in 10 from the top so that it starts a bit closer to the top, but we keep that nice consistent line down the left-hand edge. Cool.
So let's actually do something a bit more advanced now. So this text here is quite simple, but what we can do is we wrote a script earlier that will actually set the text on this element. So let's add that.
Okay, so as Tim said, we're going to add a script to replace our text and type it out. So what we're going to do is start off by removing our hello world, so there's no actual type in there. And we're going to add our script, which is called typer. One thing it does is it plays a sound when we play that back, so we require an audio source, so we've done that. I'm just going to fill that in with a little putting sound that happens as each character comes out. So if you guys want to have a look at this script, it looks like this. So for the sake of demonstration, we have a coroutine being called by start at the moment, but we're going to actually call that coroutine with a button later. But just to clue you guys in, basically we have a for loop which adds to the string of the text in the text component and then plays a sound and then yields a very short typing delay and then iterates around until it's finished the entire message. So what we're going to do is to put our type into this public string, which we've called message. So in the inspector, I can fill out this message with what I want to type. So what I'm going to do is start off by testing out what that looks like in the main text area, and then I'm going to cut it into my public variable. So I've checked that it fits in my layout. I'm then going to cut it and I'm going to paste it in place in there. So you're not going to see some of those lines, but if I scroll up, you can see that they're all there. Cool. So I'm just going to quickly save my scene and test this out. We start off with the typing delay, and then our text gets filled in.
So the UI has a little bit of dynamic elements in it now with the text coming in, but I think it's a good idea to actually make the whole UI fade in when you click a button and remove this text typing on the start of it. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to add a new button. To this, we go to the game object menu and select button. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to put this aligned with the top right of the UI by holding down the Alt key, yes, and then we're going to stretch out the size so that it fits in that nice little spot we've made for it.
So I'm going to zoom in on this one and use the rect handles. So I'm going to drag this down. So it's kind of snapping onto the other one, so it fits in nicely, so it's cool. Like that. Because we don't want an actual piece of text, I'm just going to get rid of the text element child object that gets generated by default. So now I've got a button, it's got this default GUI sprite in it, and I'm going to replace that with a box that I made earlier, which is just a white outline, and I'm going to use color to tint this to a shade of blue.
Now let's change how the transition is being applied. Like if we enter play mode now, what you'll see is that when we mouse over that element, it changes color, and that's based on the color tint mode we have selected. What we're going to do is we're going to change this to be an animation instead. So let's go ahead and do that now, Will.
Cool. So I select color tint, swap to animation, and I'm going to auto-generate animation. So what this auto-generate button is doing is creating an animator component for this, which is our general animation control, and it's going to ask me to create an asset to control that. So in my UI folder where I'm keeping everything, in my animation folder, I'm going to call this, I'm actually going to call this launch button.
So what this has done is this has created an animator on the button. So if you click here in an animation window, you'll see that now there are different states for the button. There's a normal, highlighted, pressed, and disabled created by default. And what we can do is we can open up the animation window and change these.
So what I'm going to do is select the thing that's got the animator on it. So I go back to my button, and you can see that there's several clips here: normal, highlighted, pressed, disabled, etc. So what we're going to do is select the highlighted state, and we're just going to add a curve. So basically add curve means to control any of the properties. So I'm going to hit add curve. I'm going to go to my rect transform of the button, and I'm basically going to just scale it up a little bit. So I could try and play with width and height, but really I just want it to be scaled up on the highlighted state. So what I can do here is animate it into a particular position, but instead of that, what I'm going to do is to delete that end keyframe and just use a single keyframe and rescale it. So what's actually happening here, so I'm going to use my scale tool to just bring it up, pop it up a little bit. So what's actually happening here is that because the animator transitions over time to the highlighted state, that's effectively changing from the original normal state's scale to the highlighted state scale. So I don't need more than one keyframe because it's just going to that size, and then it's going to tween back automatically to the normal one. So because I've changed that scale there, when we hover over it, it's going to do that. And I can see it automatically jumps back because it's using the transition as the animation time. Naturally, if you want to control a slower animation or have any kind of control or effect on the hover that you do, you might want to have all kinds of things animating when you hover over something, then you can do that. You just put it into the animation timeline, you choose which properties of which game objects you want to control during that particular state, and you make them happen.
Okay, so now we've got the button working in a simple way. Let's expand the functionality so that when you click the button, what happens is the text starts to display instead of what happens now, whereas the text is automatically displaying. So the first thing I think we should do, Will, is go to the script, actually, and we'll remove the automatic playing of the text. So we'll just remove the start element that starts that coroutine. And what we'll do is we'll add a manager element to the canvas, which we created earlier.
Cool, so we've got that as a script, so I'm going to drag and drop that on.
Okay, let's have a quick look at what the manager does.
Sure thing.
All this does is it's a little state tracking menu option. And what it does is for each time that the begin menu function arrives, what it will do is it will either call fade in or fade out.
So what it's doing is finding the typer script that's in our child object button. So you can see get component in children typer. And it's setting off that coroutine. So that type in or type off. And what it's also doing is looking for a general menu animation. So we haven't set that up just yet. So I'm just going to knock this out for now. So you can see the effect of starting the text or stopping the text.
So one important thing to do after we've added that is we need to set up the callback on the button. So what we do is we select the button and then we add click the plus. What this does is it allows us to have a callback. What we do is we drag the manager object into here.
So I'm dragging the object that's got the manager script on it.
Then in the function element, we select manager, and then we select the callback that we want, which is begin menu. So now when we enter play mode, what you'll see happen is when we click, there'll be the text delay, and then the text will start playing.
Now, because we've got a quick boolean in there, if we click it again,
it will play back the other way.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do is to kind of organize stuff so we can have more control over it. So the cool thing about this system is that it means that we can group stuff together using other rect transforms. And if you're familiar with Unity, you'll know that most objects have a transform. Anything that we're doing to do with canvas, we use this rect transform. So what I'm going to do is to select my canvas and create an empty child. And it knows to put a rect transform on there because it's under a canvas. So I'm going to call this container. And because it's under the canvas, we're going to use this to scale it to the parent. So I'm going to alt click scale in both axes. And if I look at my transform tool, you can see it's scaled to the size of the canvas. Good. Then what I'm going to do is to drop my dialog and title bar on as child objects of that container. So my button and my container with all of the other content in except for the button are separate. That means I get a load more control over the container. I can operate or do things with the button separately.
Yep. The main reason for this is that what we're going to be having happen is we're going to fade the menu in, and you still need to be able to see the button when this is the case. So it makes sense in this example to have the button and the content separated. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to select the container and we're going to add a group called a canvas group. Now what a canvas group does is it controls all children elements. So if you say modify the alpha of this canvas group now in the inspector just by sliding it up and down, you'll see that it fades all the alpha of the text, the labels, anything that's underneath. It also has the option to toggle if something's interactive or not, which isn't going to show up anything here because nothing is interactive anyway. And if the element blocks raycasts for the UI system. So this means you can put something in front of your UI that will not block raycasting to UI elements.
Cool.
So what we're going to do now is we're going to select the canvas and we're going to add an animation to it.
So I'm going to start off with an animator, and then I'm going to make a new controller for that animator and apply it. So I'm going to say this is main canvas animator, and I'm going to drop it onto my canvas. So now that that's set up, I can start animating the canvas or any of the child objects that happen to be something that I want to control. So when the game starts, I want my default animation to be it going from 0 to fully opaque. So the container alpha value is the thing that I want to animate. So I'm going to select my canvas because that's the thing with the animator on. I'm going to jump into my animation window. I'm going to hit add curve. I'm going to say fade in start is the name of my animation. And so I get to see all of the components on the object I've selected or the child object. So the container is the thing that I want to control, and specifically the canvas group components alpha value. So I add that in. So I basically want to go from 0 to 1, so I just need to set 0 at the start. So if I play that back now, you can see it's fading in. One thing to note is that by default all animations in Unity will loop, so I just need to select it and uncheck loop time. So I can press play and it fades in. Obviously I want that to be a lot longer, so I'm going to drag this from 1 second to more seconds. Let's say that's 4 seconds long. Feels good. Cool. Press play. Nice slow fade in. maybe too slow. Okay, let's go with 3. Cool.
So now that we've created the animation that fades in the UI, what we're going to do is we're going to hook it up to the button so that when you click the button, the UI fades in. So the first thing we do is we go back to the script, which you saw before, and we re-enable the fade in. Now what we need to do after this is we need to go to our animation controller.
So open up the animator window, and you'll notice that fade in start is the default, so that's going to play that animation straight away. And I'm going to create an empty state instead and set that as the default. So I'm just going to call this nothing, and then I'm going to create a transition, right click, make transition to start. So what I want this transition to be dependent on is a parameter called fade in. So you'll notice in the script we say fade in, set trigger fade in. So what I'm going to do is create a trigger named as such. Obviously this is case sensitive, and then I'm going to select that transition and have it rely on fade in. So it's going to find that animator. So we have get component animator, and it's going to set the trigger called fade in. Cool. However, what you'll notice when we press play is that it's already fully opaque. So although when I click the button, it's going to slowly fade in, by default, it's already there.
So what we need to do to fix this is we need to go to the canvas group and then turn the default alpha down to 0.
Cool. So now I press play, just my button's hanging there in space, click on it, and it fades in my menu.
When we do it this way, it's actually quite hard to edit the UI because it's not visible. So what we're going to do is we're going to return the default alpha to 1, and then add a default animation to this animator where we actually start with an alpha of 0. So what Will's going to do is he's going to modify this nothing animation.
So basically you need to create a new clip, and I'm going to drop it onto that nothing state that we had before. So I'm going to call this invisible menu. And all that's going to do is just store that value for us. So in my container, canvas group, I'm going to set the alpha to 0, just on a single keyframe. And then in my animator, so you'll notice it automatically adds that. So I'm just going to make a transition over to here, call that fade in, and then I can lose my old one. So the default one will have to be the invisible menu, where it has nothing. And then I click, and we transition over to fading in start.
And this also means that when we're not playing the animations, we can actually still edit the UI in a nice way in the scene.
Indeed.
So let's spice this animation up a little bit further. We're going to quickly cover how masking works in the new UI system, in this UI. So what we're going to do is we're going to open the container, and then we're going to slowly mask in the title bar when we do the fade in animation. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to move down to title bar, and we're actually going to add a parent above this. So what Will's going to do is he'll select the container and add an empty child. He'll call it a title bar mask, and then he'll add a mask component to this element.
Well, I'm just going to scale that to where it should be first. I don't want to put it in the wrong place, so I'm going to use my alt click again. So I need my mask component. I'm going to add that on there. And by default, it draws an image so you can actually see where that mask is. I know that that rect's in the right place, so I'm going to uncheck draw image.
So what happens now is that anything that is underneath a mask, we masked to the area that this mask contains. So let's drag the title bar to be a child of that mask. Okay, like so. So if we now move that title bar left and right, you'll see that it masks out when it moves outside of that rectangle. This is quite powerful and allows you to do quite a few different types of special effects. We've seen that the masking works as we'd expect, so we're going to actually animate that object moving in while the fade in occurs. So let's start by going to the animation window and just clicking on record mode. And for keyframe 1, we're just going to drag it off frame.
So you notice it's disappearing, but you have to remember that we faded everything out to begin with, so that's kind of to be expected. So I'm going to drag that off screen and then go to the end, placing the keyframe, and drag it back to where it should be. Now you'll see that over time it's fading in and the mask is bringing it in too. So let's just see that in action. Cool. So that's animating something coming in with a mask, but another cool thing that we can do is use the image component and the image type set to fill in. So we're going to do this with the dialog. I'm going to change the image type to filled. And what that gives me is a fill method, a fill origin, and a fill amount. And remember, because all of these are public properties, we can animate them over time. So alongside our animation of fade in start, what we're going to do is add in those particular properties that we want. So the first thing I'm going to do is to set it to a vertical fill in, starting at the top. So what this means is I can control it like this. So you can see with the fill amount, 1 is the full height and 0 is no height at all. So what I'm going to do is to go into my animation window again. I'm going to add a curve for within the container, the dialog. So I go to my image component and fill amount is the value I want. Helpfully this is from 0 to 1, so all I need to do is say at the start it's 0 and that's going to fill in over time. So obviously what we could do here is do a little bit of tweaking and get the text delay for typing to come in so that it fills in just as the typing's coming out, but we have that delay of 2 seconds. So let's just take a look at what that looks like. Okay, so that fills out kind of slowly, the text comes in a bit later. So what we could do is actually move that fill amount forward, so that after a second it begins to fill down and then our text is coming in at the same amount. So it's just filling down just before our text starts to come in, which we know will happen at 2 seconds.
So because the UI we have here is in world space and it has a nice bit of perspective applied to it due to the camera, what we can do is we can actually add 3D elements into the UI. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by adding a rotating element to our button that we've created.
Okay, so the container thing that sits at the top and contains the dialog and the title mask are different things that we can use. So we could bring in this element alongside our mask, and that's exactly what we're going to do. Okay, so we know that the title bar is the thing that's sliding into the mask, so I'm going to add a child object to that, and that's going to be the thing that we fill in that button with. So the button itself is going to be the functional element, but these are just going to be decorative. So let's go to game object, create UI, and add an image, and I'm going to drop that onto my title bar. I'm going to use the snapping tools to position that roughly in the center there, and then I'm going to add a sprite to it. So I've got this Unity logo, I'm going to drop that on there. And I'm going to scale it down a little bit. Now, because this is 3D UI, what we might want to do is bring it forward a little bit. So when I look at that from a bird's eye view, if I bring that forward, you can see that it's effectively popped out in front. So you also notice the mask is working in the scene view, which is cool, that's what we want. And what I'm going to do is to actually create 4 of these, and because we want them to pivot around a single point, I'm going to create an empty child object to hold them. So I'm going to call this Unity logo holder, and I'm going to put my first logo in there. So I'm going to call this logo 1. So my Unity logo holder is actually created over here. So let's correct that. I'm going to put the logo at the center of it, and I'm going to move the logo holder back to where I want this to be. And then bring my logo forward in Z or Z. Cool, that's what we want. So then I can go ahead and create the other 3 logos. And basically I'm looking to make a 3D square of these. So I'm going to fast forward now whilst I position these. Okay, so now I've got all 4 of those into a formation. It looks kind of strange at the moment, but that's because we want everything except for the first one to have a really low alpha at the start. So I'm going to select all the others, multi-select, and I'm going to drag them down to a really low alpha, something low down like that. So the animation that we're going to do with these is we're going to rotate them around, and as we rotate them, we're going to control their alpha value. So I'm going to add an animator to the logo holder, and I'm going to start animating that. So again, it needs a controller. I'm going to call this logos and put it in my animation folder. And then I'm going to apply that to my U logo holder. So now when I start animating this, I can add a curve and rotate that rect transform in order to spin these round. So I'm going to call it logo rotation. And what I'm going to be doing is rotating the rect transform initially. So I'm not going to edit the alpha of those just yet. I'm going to create a rotation, and the end keyframe I'm going to put at, let's say, 3 seconds. Then I'm going to space out some keyframes and rotate them around. So I'm going to rotate around -90, then -180, then -270, and of course I need to space them out, so I need one more keyframe, -360. So now if I play this back, we can see that they rotate around. I'm going to make this a little bit nicer, so I'm going to go into my curve mode, select my keys, and I'm going to flatten these out so that effectively it comes to a stop at each one. Should look like this. Obviously I need to do that for the start and end keyframe too. And now all that's left to do is to fix the alpha for each one. So this is a bit of manual work, so we can fast forward this, but I'm just going to show you how I do the first one. So with logo number 1, what I'm going to do is to go to each of these keyframes and set the alpha of the image. So I'm going to logo 1, image component, color, and I'm going to set the alpha value. So we know by default logo 1 is the one that's at the front. So as soon as it goes around to the side, I want to transition it to the low alpha. So I'm going to come up with a value for what the lower alpha should be. I'm going to set a keyframe. So I set that to 0.2. So I want it to be 0.2 until this keyframe, at which point I want it to come back to a value of 1 again. So at this keyframe, I want it to be 0.2. And then I'm going to make sure those curves are flat so that it doesn't dip below that number. Cool. So all the way around, fades down, comes back up at the end. I can go ahead and do this for the others, but for the sake of this demo, we're just going to show you how we do that one. So it comes in with the mask, it's animating around. Right now we have that typing out, but what we want to do is actually close off the entire menu. So we're going to go ahead and do that. So what I'm going to do is to select my canvas. And the canvas has got that main canvas animator on it, remember. So it's got invisible menu and fade in start. So what I'm going to do, make a new empty state called fade out. Then what I'm going to do is to take the same fade in start animation, apply it to that state, but the speed is going to be -1. So it's basically going to take exactly the same clip, play it backwards, which is exactly what we want it to do. And to transition to that, I'm going to make a transition, and I'm going to make a new trigger called fade out, and I'm going to set that to happen. Then what we need it to do, once it's done the fade out animation, is to naturally transition back to the invisible menu, and exit time will take care of that as a default transition for us. Then we just need to jump over to our script, comment back in the call to that trigger, and I'm going to save my scene and press play. Okay, so the last thing I'm going to do is just to fix the overall height of the canvas. So when we played it back, you'll notice that the text is actually a lot shorter than the overall height of the white dialog bar. So I'm just going to grab the original canvas and drag that up. Something like that. Let's play that back. And there we go. So that's a nice example of how we can use World Space UI in Unity 4.6.